Lesson 7.3, welcome grade 8. It's the sacred landscape. We're going to take a look at how the religious values of the Aztecs affected their interactions with each other and other people. So stick around and let's learn something. Lesson 7.3, how did religious beliefs affect the worldview of the Aztecs? Oh, religion, here we go, always changing the way we view things. And, well, for the Aztecs, it's no different. So, last lesson, we talked about the physical landscape of the Aztecs. Today, we're going to talk about the sacred landscape of the Aztecs. And we're going to focus on the Aztec gods. And forgive me as I am going to butcher these names if I try and say them, but that's okay because, well, I've got no other choice. So before we get started on the actual gods that we're about to learn about, we need to understand that the Aztec gods controlled every aspect of the Aztec world. It told them how to live, it told them how to behave, it told them what to do on a regular, daily, almost hour by hour basis. And unlike many world religions today, they had many gods, not just one god. And their gods had a hierarchy. There were some gods that were more important to them than other gods, as we will see. Huitzilopochtli, maybe I should just stop trying to say the name of the gods and just tell you what these gods are. This god here is the sun god. And this is one of their main gods. This is the god that told them to leave the deserts of the north and to go and find this eagle perched on the cactus. This is who they sacrificed a lot of people to. They did their daily sacrificing to appease this god, to give this god the strength to overcome the night god. He was in a constant battle with this god of the night. This god, and you can see how it's portrayed here, it's tribal and it's very warlike, which then translates to the Aztec worldview, which is also going to be a very warlike worldview. Then we've got this god. This is the god, the lord of the night sky. And he is in constant battle with the sun god constantly. And you can see this happening. The sun rises, the sun sets, and you see this, and this is what the Aztecs believed. His name, I'm not going to try and pronounce it to you guys, means smoking mirror, and he used a black mirror to see the future. And as I mentioned earlier, he's in this constant battle, and he is considered to be the most powerful god of the Aztecs, and they feared him the most, and that's why they needed to sacrifice to give the sun god the strength to overcome this lord of the night sky. Then Quetzalcoatl. I butchered that one, but I wanted to give it a shot. This is the feathered serpent, god of wind. They did make offerings to this god, not in the forms of human sacrifice, but in the form of flowers and incense and birds. He got into a fight with the god of the night sky, and he left the valley. He left the Valley of Mexico. And on his departure, he said that he is going to return in the year 1 reed. So the Aztecs growing up, they were always waiting for the return of Quetzalcoatl. I think that might be a better way of saying it, or pronouncing it, I should say. And coincidentally, now get a load of this. The year 1 reed, when the Aztecs were celebrating and recognizing the year 1 reed, or in that time frame, that's the arrival of Cortez, which is kind of mind-blowing because this god in the stories, in their oral history, said that he is going to return. And he gave them the date that when he was going to return, and that's when Cortez comes. So that's pretty weird. Okay, the last god that we're going to talk about is Tlaloc. He is the god of rain. He is the most feared of all the gods. Not the most powerful, but the most feared. It's hard for us to comprehend that, because wouldn't the most powerful god also be the most feared god? So this is something that is very difficult for us to understand. But Tlaloc is the god of rain, and he was the most feared because of the floods and because of drought. The floods will cause devastation. Drought will cause famine, which causes devastation. So he is essential for the survival of the Aztecs. So this is the god of rain. All four of these gods, they interact with each other, and there's also other gods as well, but we only focus on these four. So the sacred landscape is connected to the physical landscape. And you saw in the opening intro here to my lesson, I had an Aztec calendar sitting behind me. And they had two calendars. The Aztecs had two calendars, just like many of us have multiple calendars. If you're religious, you've got our regular calendar, January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, things like that. But then you also have your religious calendar. And Christians, Catholics, they have a religious calendar that is a 3-year cycle. And then our regular calendar is a 12-month cycle. Well, the Aztecs also had a similar kind of idea. They had the two calendars. One was a solar calendar, which is going to be like our yearly calendar, a 12-month calendar. And then they had their sacred calendar, which for those of us who are religious, we have our faith calendars. And the sacred calendar was 260 days in length, and it took 52 years to catch up to their solar calendar, to become in sync with each other. What do you think would happen on that 52nd year? How are they going to celebrate that? It's going to probably be a pretty big party. And if it's a pretty big party, what do you think's going to happen, knowing what you know already about the Aztecs? If you're thinking human sacrifice, you would be right. So let's take a closer look at their calendar. So they had this stone calendar. Here's another picture of it. This is a different one. And this stone calendar is dedicated to their sun god, Huitzilopochtli. And he is right in the middle of that calendar. And this calendar represents and shows how the world began and how the world is going to end. So the Aztecs, in their journey, they had 4 eras before their current era. And the end of each era is represented here on the stone calendar. And it tells the story of how that era ended. So the first era was destroyed by jaguars, second by hurricanes, the third by a fiery rain, and the fourth by a flood. Now, this does not mean that their civilization ended. This just means that this was a pivotal point in their history, and they're marking it. So the jaguars, for example, that could make sense. A hurricane obviously makes sense. A fiery rain, that could be like a volcano, and the flood definitely makes sense. And then they predicted that the next major event that they are going to be marking, that the era will change, and it's going to change by an earthquake. The Mayans also had a calendar, okay, and they also predicted a lot of these things, and they predicted the end of the world as well. The end of the world was, I think, supposed to happen in 2012. I think The Rock made a movie about 2012 and the prediction of the end of the world. I'm pretty sure it was him. I don't know. Look it up, but I'm pretty sure. But this is not the first civilization that we've seen that had these types of predictions, and it's not the last one either in terms of predictions. Now we're going to get to the good stuff. Okay, well, we're going to introduce you to the good stuff because we're going to take a lot more of an in-depth look at this later on in the unit. But human sacrifice. I know everybody's been waiting for this one. This is what we've all been connecting to the Aztecs, and this is how we know the Aztecs. We know them through this human sacrifice. It was a very, deeply religious, significant tradition of this sacrificing to take place. This was the strongest expression that they could make to the gods. And the Aztecs believed that the blood of their victim actually fed the gods. Okay? They didn't have a scientific method. They didn't have a way to prove any kind of hypothesis. This is what they believed. The priests would tell the Aztec people that this is what's happening. The Aztec people had no reason not to believe their priests. Their priests were very well educated in astronomy. So they knew about the movement of planets and things like that, and they could time their events in such a way that they could keep the Aztec people believing these beliefs, and because it was a very religious thing. They all believed, the priests, the Aztecs, the engineers, Montezuma, everybody believed that if the gods are not fed, the world is going to end. And every living Aztec person was ready to be sacrificed. It was an honor to be sacrificed. But at the same time, you don't want to lose all of your population to the sacrifice. And that's why the Aztecs often went to war. They needed victims to sacrifice in these ceremonies on a nightly basis. So war gave them those victims. And we'll learn a little bit later how war was dealt with the Aztecs. They weren't fighting to kill people. They were fighting to get these victims to sacrifice. They were fighting to get these prisoners. All of this was done in the name of the sun god, and oh, look at that. This is why they are called the people of the sun. Now, we're going to come back to human sacrifice a little bit later. I just wanted to introduce it here. The next thing we're going to talk about is the capital city, Tenochtitlan. And I did say that one correctly. I've been saying this one for a very long time on a regular basis, so that is how you say it, Tenochtitlan. And there's a picture of it here. It's depicted here in this drawing. The Aztecs, it was common belief for the Aztecs that the earth was flat and round, kind of like a pie. Okay, well, look at that. We've heard that before. The people we know believe that the earth was flat. Some people still do. And the Aztecs were no different. The Aztecs divided the world into 4 sections. Okay, kind of like their causeways, like on the image here. In the middle of the earth was Tenochtitlan. Okay, remember, they're not viewing the earth as a globe, as a sphere. They're viewing it as a flat pie. And Tenochtitlan was in the center, because that's where the sun god told them to go. He assigned them to go there so they believed that they're the god's chosen people, the Aztecs are, and their city is then going to be the center of the world. Therefore, they built Tenochtitlan to look like their world. They divided it into 4 sections. And in the middle of Tenochtitlan, and Tenochtitlan is the middle of the world, in the middle of Tenochtitlan, they had their main temples. And not only were there temples in the center of Tenochtitlan, obviously there were temples all over the city. There's hundreds of them, and even throughout the Aztec Empire. But their main temples are going to be in the center because they've created Tenochtitlan to look like what they perceived the earth to look like. And the temples that were created, you know this from the previous lesson, in the shape of mountains because it physically brought them closer to the gods. And this was how they modeled Tenochtitlan after what they believed the world to look like. And when the Spanish conquistadors make their way over to the New World and they make it to Tenochtitlan for the first time, many of them in their accounts have said that Tenochtitlan reminded them of Venice of the New World because of all of the causeways and because of the chinampas and people moving by canoe in between. It reminded them of Venice of the New World. Tenochtitlan, Venice of the New World. All right, I want you to head over to your notebook and complete the questions for this part of the chapter.